you can't demonstrate genuine courage if you don't experience fear, and you can't demonstrate genuine faith if you don't experience uncertainty. There is no true virtue in faith without doubt. This is the argument I'll be making in this video. So first, let me start by defining faith and virtue, just to make sure we agree on our terms. Let's start with faith. So faith can be a little bit of a controversial term. It tends to have a strong spiritual/religious connotation. In my case, I don't mean it strictly in a spiritual, religious sense, but just any act of strong trust where you're kind of risking something. You can't be sure exactly, but you decide to put your faith into something or someone. You could also think of it as hope. That's a strong synonym in the way I use it. The reason I like using faith best rather than a slightly less controversial term like trust is because there's got more of a, gravitas to faith, which I like. I like that there's this connotation, this undertone of like, it really matters, it's really something important, and you've got to make a strong stand. That's why I like it, and that's why I'm using this word instead of another. So let me give a few examples of things that would require faith with this definition. This could be revealing something very vulnerable to someone, and you're not exactly sure how they're going to react. It could be making the choice of whether the person you're with currently is the right person for you to live the rest of your life with, to marry, to commit strongly to. It could be, is the current option you've chosen the right path for you in life, the right career or calling? Is that what you should really commit to? And of course, it could also be belief in God or other types of spiritual beliefs. So I personally strongly value faith/hope. The first reason is that I experience frequent doubt. I'm constantly second guessing myself and prone to uncertainty. I can kind of see all the counter arguments for any positions, all the ways in which something is not perfect, all the potential ways something can go wrong. I'm naturally attuned to that. So because I'm very self-aware of this constant uncertainty, I yearn for some certainty and the ability to trust, and so I value faith highly. But that's not the only reason. By the way, if you resonate with my situation of constant doubt and second guessing, you might appreciate one of the blog posts I wrote, which is called Too Skeptical to Disbelieve, and you'll find it in the description. Whether or not you share my situation or you agree with this stance, I think making leaps of faith is unavoidable in the reality we live in, at least according to the definition I've given. It's the only way to transcend the current place you're at in life, to grow, to move to the next level, to get something you've desired. The thing is, you can't lose if you don't play, but you can't win either. As Wayne Gretzky would say, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you do take risks, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but the only way to win sometimes is to take a risk. When it's worth it, at least. I'm not saying take risks all the time. I think for me, the strongest example or like kind of image that I can think of when I think about this value of faith/hope would come from The Castle in the Sky by Hayao Miyazaki. I'm a big Miyazaki fanboy on my end. As you might have noticed, I decided to wear my Ghibli shirt today to stay in the theme. Just pretend you didn't see this incredibly well camouflaged lavalier microphone. It'll be a little secret. But anyways, in this movie, there are two protagonists, Shita and Pazu. And at some point, I'm not telling you the whole entire movie, but at some point, Shita is on a high tower and she's trying to escape. And Pazu comes to get her. He's on this little flying vehicle, but they're a bit too far away for him to grab her arm. But they're kind of running out of time, so she's got to act quick. And so basically, the only two options she's got is either she can stay on the tower, or she can jump into the arms of Pazu and hope he catches her. Because if he doesn't, if he fails, she's just going to splatter down super far below and die. That's a literal act of faith. Now in the movie, she doesn't hesitate that much. She just jumps and he does catch her, so that's cool. I think that's a noteworthy, memorable exemplification of faith. It was a risky choice, but it did land her in a definitely better position than she was before. All in all, it was probably worth it. Now, obviously, that's easier to say because it worked out. I've got a lot of quotes I can use to kind of illustrate this general concept. I'll just keep it to two, but that are fairly short. The first one comes from Mistborn, which is a fantasy trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I don't know how I'm supposed to pronounce the name of this character, so you'll have to forgive me if I don't do it right. But the quote goes, "Better to trust and be betrayed," Kelsier seemed to whisper. It had been one of the survivor's mottos. Better to love and be hurt. And another pretty moving variation on the same general thought comes in the form of the poem Icarus, which we don't know exactly who did it. Some people think it's Oscar Wilde. It goes, "Never regret thy fall, O Icarus of the fearless flight, for the greatest tragedy of them all is never to feel the burning light." All right, now moving on to my definition of virtue. Virtue is pretty similar to another concept, which is morality or ethics. There's many different words to refer to similar things. I'd say that morality is about doing good and avoiding evil and defining what is good and evil. And virtue is similar, except that it's more of a property of a person and or an action. So an action or a person can be more or less virtuous, and that depends on the goodness of the action, defined by morality, but also, in my opinion, how much of a cost it comes at for the person to do this good action. So how hard is it? How much is it demanding of them to do this good action? And the harder it is for them, the more the virtue is amplified. So even if you do something that's easy for you but good, that's still virtuous. But it'd be even more virtuous if it was harder. Yeah, there's kind of a question of how much do you have to sacrifice, and it could just be your comfort or your habits in order to do this good thing. I'm not sure how controversial this definition is. That's mine, and I'm going to be using that going forward. If we use this definition, doing something that's moderately good but very hard for you to do could be more virtuous than doing something that's very good to do but very easy for you. Now, it depends, obviously, on the context. And I think that we would generally agree that there seems to be some element of merit in virtue. And, like, we've got to be careful with this because it's easy to go veer off the deep end when we think about merit. The idea is not to guilt trip people, and you can refer to my video on aspiration motivation versus shame-based motivation. It's not to compare and judge harshly and put people into little labels and boxes. The goal is just to have a framework of thought to guide action, right? Because you want to maximize virtue and goodness. So it's still good to do good things even if they come easy to you. It's just you get more props, so to speak, if it's harder for you. What might be a little bit counterintuitive about this is that people that we would consider to be by nature more evil or worse, when they're doing the right thing, nevertheless, they'd be more virtuous than someone who's like easily doing the right thing, so to speak. But I do think that plays a role, right? I think that how hard doing the right thing is for someone should be considered when we're kind of, assessing their actions and their moral character, regardless of whether we think it should be easy or not. So let's take an example. Let's say you're walking across a river and then you see a kid that's drowning. And then you jump in, you dive, and you go and rescue them. That would be good, and therefore it would be a virtuous action. But let's say you're in the same situation, except this time you have a deep phobia of water. It's really terrifying for you. But nevertheless, because it's important, you still dive in and save that kid. Well, that would be even more virtuous than doing it if you weren't scared of water. Now, time to wrap this up into our consideration of virtue in relationship to faith. First off, I'd like to make sure to clarify that I'm not saying you should be using faith and gut feeling and intuition all the time to make decisions. It's good if you can make a rational analysis of pros and cons. That's good, and it should be part of the decision-making process. But often enough, there is a gap of uncertainty that can't really be crossed fully with pure rationality, and so you kind of need this leap of faith. It can be big or small in order to, act. And this ties back to other topics I've covered, like the fact that, for example, to the best of our abilities, it seems like it's impossible to absolutely justify any claim. And I talked about that in my videos on philosophical skepticism. But in the case where we do need faith, where does virtue come into play in here? I would say that simple certainty doesn't have any moral weight in of itself. It's not good, it's not evil. So the only factor for virtue that's left would be risk, hardship, sacrifice, right? So let's consider blind faith, okay? You're just completely certain about something. You don't even question it. you've got your little blinders. There's no hardship in that. There's no sacrifice. There's no wrestling with something. It's more an act of delusion than an act of virtue. There's no virtue in this stance. And to be actually, you could even make the argument that it's actually bad, because you should strive, if you care about truth at least, or honesty, to um, to have a fair assessment of a situation. So if you're unduly certain, that would be a bad thing with that framework. The same applies to blind optimism. So, you can think about a Pollyanna or Panglossian attitude, right, where you're just saying everything is peachy and you never acknowledge any problem, which is not an accurate representation of reality, and it's unfair for all the people that suffer from all the many ways in which our reality is, has got a lot of horrible stuff in it. But it also applies to cynicism, right? That has no face and that doesn't risk anything, but therefore stays stuck in complacency and stagnation. And so I think that under this framework, blind faith, blind optimism, and staunch cynicism are basically equivalent in that they're not virtuous. And so the only real virtuous option, given this framework, is to take a realistic assessment of the situation, including the uncertainty, and still, when it matters, when it makes sense, rely, for the last stretch, on some form of trust or faith or hope. So the conclusion of this video is that you shouldn't be too hard on yourself if you're experiencing doubts. You might think you're supposed to have your mind 100% set with no doubts, no uncertainty, and so you might be beating yourself up if you still second guess yourself sometimes, if you're not exactly sure, if you've always got those nagging doubts, but that's part of it. And there is virtue in working and striving whilst acknowledging these doubts. Courage isn't fearlessness. You can only demonstrate and exemplify courage in spite of fear, not in its absence. And you can only exemplify faith and hope in spite of uncertainty, not in its absence. The same thing applies in both of these cases. If you're curious about some of the other topics I broached in this video, like my blog post or the video on Pyrrhonism about why we can't be completely sure of anything, at least it seems that way, then you can check the video suggestion that will pop up on the screen and the description. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.